There's a particular kind of vulnerability that comes with dormitory living. You're away from home for the first time, surrounded by strangers, sleeping in a building with hundreds of other people, separated by walls so thin you can hear your neighbors sneeze. You share bathrooms with people you barely know. You trust locks that a credit card could defeat. You tell yourself it's safe because there are so many witnesses, so many people around, so much activity that nothing bad could happen without someone noticing. But dorms are also anonymous, transient, filled with people who come and go, who graduate and transfer, who disappear and are replaced by new faces every semester. The person in the room next door could be anyone. The maintenance worker in the hallway could be anyone. The figure you see at 3 a.m. when you're stumbling back from the bathroom, half asleep and disoriented, that could be anyone too. The following 3 accounts come from students who learned that campus safety is sometimes an illusion. That the buildings where we live and study and sleep can harbor secrets much older and darker than we imagine. That some things don't graduate, some things never leave. Story 1, The Tunnel Behind the Closet, Part 1. Brianna Walsh arrived at Hartwick University with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and the determined optimism of every 18-year-old starting fresh somewhere new. She'd chosen this small New England liberal arts school specifically because it felt safe. Quiet campus, low crime rate. The kind of place where students left their doors unlocked, and everyone seemed to know each other by name. Her dormitory was Founders Hall, a Gothic revival building constructed in 1892 that had been converted to student housing sometime in the 1960s. It had high ceilings, creaky floors, and the particular charm of old architecture that made every corridor feel like something out of a period drama. Her room was on the 3rd floor, a double, shared with a girl named Jasmine who was friendly enough but kept to herself. They established the usual roommate protocols: lights out by midnight, headphones for music, a shared mini fridge stocked with snacks they both contributed to. Normal, comfortable, exactly what Brianna had hoped for. The first incident happened 3 weeks into the semester. Brianna woke up around 4 a.m. needing water and noticed something strange. Her desk had been rearranged. Not dramatically, her textbooks were still in a stack, her laptop was still in place, but items had shifted. Her pencil cup was on the left side instead of the right. Her notebooks were in a different order. Her lamp had been angled toward the bed. Brianna assumed she'd done it herself without remembering, or maybe Jasmine had borrowed something and moved things around. She didn't mention it, didn't think it was worth mentioning. The second incident was harder to dismiss. A week later, she woke to find her laptop open and logged into her Instagram account. Not just logged in, actively scrolled through her photos. The screen showed a picture she'd posted 2 years ago during high school, and someone had zoomed in on her face. Brianna asked Jasmine about it. Jasmine swore she hadn't touched the laptop. They both laughed nervously and agreed it must have been a glitch. Some kind of sleep browsing that Brianna didn't remember. People did strange things in their sleep. It didn't have to mean anything, but the incidents continued. Every few days, Brianna would wake to find something changed. Her clothes folded differently than she'd left them. Her toothbrush moved to a different spot on her desk. Her phone charged when she was certain she'd forgotten to plug it in. Once she woke to find her blankets tucked around her so tightly she couldn't move, wrapped like a cocoon by hands she hadn't felt. She started losing sleep, jumping at sounds, checking and rechecking that the door was locked before she could close her eyes. She told herself she was being paranoid, that there had to be a rational explanation, that nothing bad was actually happening. Part 2, the weekend that changed everything, happened in mid-October. Jasmine went home for her grandmother's birthday, leaving Brianna alone in the room from Friday afternoon until Sunday night. Brianna was almost relieved. She'd started to wonder privately if maybe Jasmine was behind the disturbances. Not maliciously, maybe just a weird prank, a way to cope with the stress of first semester adjustments. She felt guilty for suspecting her roommate. But she also felt like being alone might settle the question once and for all. Friday night, Brianna locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, and went to sleep with the lights on. She woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of movement. Soft sounds. Barely there, the whisper of fabric, the creak of a floorboard. She lay frozen in her bed, eyes squeezed shut, trying to convince herself she was dreaming. Then she felt it. Breath on her face, warm and slow and rhythmic. Someone was standing beside her bed, leaning close, breathing on her while she pretended to sleep. Brianna screamed, thrashed upright, grabbed the lamp from her nightstand and swung it blindly into the darkness. She hit nothing. When she finally found the light switch, heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, the room was empty. The door was still locked. The chair was still wedged under the handle. Everything looked exactly as it had when she'd gone to sleep. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the corner of her room with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand, ready to call 911, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. In the morning, she reported the incident to campus security. The officer who took her report was sympathetic but skeptical, checked the door, checked the windows, found nothing out of place. He asked if she'd been under stress, if she'd been drinking, if maybe she'd had a particularly vivid nightmare. Brianna insisted she knew what she'd experienced. The officer promised to look into it. He reviewed the security footage from the hallway outside her room. What he found made him call his supervisor. Then his supervisor called the police. Part 3. The footage showed Brianna entering her room at 11:43 p.m. Friday night. It showed the door remaining closed and undisturbed for over 3 hours. At 3:14 a.m., the door opened from the inside. A man emerged. He was thin and pale, dressed in dark clothes, moving with the careful silence of someone who had done this many times before. He looked both ways down the hallway, then retreated back into Brianna's room, closing the door behind him. He was inside with her for another hour before he emerged again at 4:22 a.m. and disappeared around the corner toward the stairwell. Brianna had not been alone that night. She had not been alone for weeks. The investigation revealed a maintenance tunnel system that ran beneath Founders Hall, connecting to the building's basement, and through a series of access points to closets and storage spaces on every floor. The tunnel had been built in the original 1892 construction, used for heating systems and pipe access, and largely forgotten when the building was renovated. Brianna's closet had a panel in the back wall. It wasn't obvious. You'd have to push aside the hanging clothes and look carefully at the joints in the paneling, but it opened to a narrow shaft that led down to the tunnel system. Someone had been using it for years. The man was identified as Robert Garland, a former student who had been expelled from Hartwick in 2019 for stalking a female classmate. After his expulsion, he'd simply stayed, moved into the tunnels, built himself a nest in one of the larger junction points where 3 corridors met. He'd been living there for over 2 years. His nest contained a sleeping bag, bottles of water, stolen food from the dining hall, and journals. Dozens of journals filled with meticulous observations about female students in Founders Hall, their schedules, their habits. Their social media profiles copied by hand into cramped handwriting. Their photos, printed on the university library's printers and pasted onto walls that no one had seen in decades. Brianna was documented extensively, but she wasn't the only one. Over 30 women appeared in Robert's journals, going back to the beginning of his tunnel habitation. Some had graduated and moved on, never knowing they'd been watched. Some were still on campus, still walking past access points that led to places they didn't know existed, still sleeping in rooms that connected to the darkness where Robert had made his home. He'd been in Brianna's room at least 12 times, according to his own documentation, watching her sleep, moving her belongings, logging into her accounts to study her life in more detail, planning for something he never quite articulated but clearly intended. Brianna transferred to a different university after that semester. She couldn't live in a building with tunnels, couldn't trust walls that might contain doors, couldn't sleep without checking every surface for panels that might open, for joints that might give way, for the darkness that might contain someone watching. Robert Garland is in prison now. The tunnels have been sealed with concrete and steel. Founders Hall is still a dormitory, still housing freshmen who don't know its history, still offering that false sense of security that comes with old stone walls and heavy doors. But sometimes, Brianna hears from friends still at Hartwick. Sometimes they mention strange things happening in Founders. Belongings moved. Laptops opened. The sense that someone is watching when no one is there. She wants to believe the tunnels are truly sealed. She wants to believe no one else will ever emerge from a closet at 3 a.m. to breathe on a sleeping student's face. But she's not certain. She's not certain of anything anymore. Second story, the voice that wasn't HERS. Mei Chen had never believed in ghosts. She was a chemistry major, a rationalist, the kind of person who needed evidence before accepting any claim. She'd chosen her university in Southern California specifically for its research programs, its laboratory facilities, its commitment to scientific rigor. She wasn't the type to be scared by old buildings or strange sounds. She wasn't the type to imagine things that weren't there. Her roommate, Taylor Okonkwo, was assigned to her at random, the standard lottery that matched thousands of freshmen with strangers they'd share bedrooms with for an entire year. They got along well enough. Taylor was a psychology major, quieter than May but friendly, the kind of person who seemed comfortable in any social situation without needing to be the center of attention. They developed an easy rhythm, shared meals sometimes, studied in comfortable silence, went to parties together when the mood struck. Normal roommate things, normal college experience. The sleepwalking started in November. May woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of movement and opened her eyes to find Taylor standing in the middle of the room, facing the wall, completely motionless. "Taylor?" No response. Taylor just stood there, eyes open but unfocused, staring at nothing. May had heard that you weren't supposed to wake sleepwalkers, that it could disorient them, potentially even cause them to become violent. So she watched, waited. After a few minutes, Taylor turned and walked back to her bed, lay down, and seemed to fall back into normal sleep. May asked about it in the morning. Taylor had no memory of the episode. She said she'd never sleepwalked before, seemed embarrassed about it, promised to see a doctor if it happened again. It happened again, 3 nights later, then again a week after that. Each time, Taylor would rise from her bed, stand facing a wall or a corner, and remain motionless for several minutes before returning to sleep. She never spoke, never interacted with her environment, just stood and stared and waited for something May couldn't see. May convinced herself it was just stress. Finals were approaching. Taylor had mentioned family pressure to maintain her GPA. Sleepwalking was a known response to anxiety. There was nothing supernatural about it, nothing that couldn't be explained by brain chemistry and circadian rhythm disruption. Then one night in early December, Taylor started talking. The voice woke May from a dead sleep. It was Taylor's mouth moving, Taylor's vocal cords producing sound, but it wasn't Taylor's voice. The pitch was wrong, lower, rougher. A man's voice coming from a woman's throat, speaking words that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. "He's under the bed again. He's under the bed and he won't come out. Don't look at the window. Don't look. Don't look, don't look, don't look." May sat up terrified, watching Taylor stand in the center of the room with her eyes open and empty, speaking in a voice that couldn't be hers. The words continued. Fragments, warnings, phrases that seemed to reference things May couldn't see. They locked the door. They locked it from the outside. "He can't get out. He'll never get out. He's scratching. Can you hear him scratching? He's been scratching for 40 years. And then in a whisper so quiet May almost missed it. "Marcus, my name is Marcus. Please, someone remember my name." The episode lasted about 10 minutes. Taylor returned to bed with no memory of what had happened, no explanation for the voice, no knowledge of anyone named Marcus. May didn't sleep the rest of the night. She spent the dark hours researching the history of their dormitory, a building constructed in the late 1970s that had housed students for nearly 50 years. It didn't take long to find the story. Marcus Webb, sophomore psychology major, had lived in May's exact room during the fall semester of 1982. He'd struggled with severe depression, had become increasingly isolated as the semester progressed. One night in December, he'd ended his own life, in this room, in the exact space where May slept. The university had never publicized the death. The room had been quietly renumbered, the floor plan slightly altered, the history buried under layers of administrative discretion. But the information was there if you knew how to look, in archived student newspapers, in old yearbooks. In the gaps between official records where truth sometimes hides. May didn't tell Taylor what she'd found. She wasn't sure how, wasn't sure it would help. Wasn't even sure she believed it herself, despite all evidence suggesting something impossible was happening. Instead, she waited, watched. Documented Taylor's episodes with a recording app on her phone, capturing that impossible voice saying things no living person should know. And then, during the next episode, she did something she would later describe as either brave or incredibly stupid. Taylor was speaking again, the not Taylor voice warning about scratching and windows and someone who couldn't get out. May got down on her hands and knees, and she looked under Taylor's bed. The floor beneath the bed was concrete, covered with industrial carpet that had probably been installed decades ago. In the dim light from May's phone flashlight, she could see dust, old wrappers, the detritus that accumulated in spaces no one ever cleaned, and scratches, deep gouges in the carpet, worn through to the concrete beneath, forming letters that May had to trace with her fingers to read. Marcus. Someone had scratched a name into the floor beneath this bed, had scratched it so deeply and so repeatedly that it had worn through the carpet and into the stone itself. Had scratched it, May realized with creeping horror, from below, as if trying to claw a message upward. As if trying to reach someone sleeping above. May moved out of the room the next day. She never went back. She reported what she'd found to the residence staff, showed them photographs of the scratches, explained the sleepwalking episodes. They nodded politely, promised to look into it. The room was quietly designated as storage space for the rest of the year, never assigned to students again. But the story didn't end there. Taylor's parents came to visit during winter break. They had dinner with May and Taylor, a friendly get-together that turned strange when May casually mentioned the sleepwalking episodes. Taylor's mother went pale. Her father set down his fork. They exchanged a look that suggested a secret neither wanted to reveal. After much hesitation, the truth emerged. Taylor had been adopted. Her biological parents had died when she was a baby, and she'd been raised by relatives who had never told her the details of her birth family. Her biological mother had been a woman named Catherine Webb. Catherine had a brother named Marcus. He'd attended college in California in the early 1980s. He'd never graduated. The family had never discussed what happened to him. Taylor was Marcus's niece. She'd been sleeping in her uncle's death room without knowing it, and apparently Marcus had recognized her. Had reached across 40 years of silence to speak through the only connection still available to him. Had tried, in whatever limited way the dead could try, to make someone remember that he had existed. The sleepwalking stopped after Taylor learned the truth. The episode ceased entirely, as if whatever needed to be said had finally been heard. The scratches remained under the bed, preserved in concrete, waiting for someone else to find them. May graduated 2 years later. She went on to medical school, became a psychiatrist, specializing in trauma and grief. She still doesn't believe in ghosts. Not exactly. But she believes in connections, in the ways that suffering can echo through time, in the possibility that some messages are so desperate they find ways to be delivered even after the sender is gone. She keeps a photo of Marcus Webb on her office wall. She found it in a 1982 yearbook and had it professionally restored. He was young, smiling, standing in front of a building that no longer exists. He looked like someone who had his whole life ahead of him. He looked like someone who deserved to be remembered, and now at least he is. Third story, the door that shouldn't exist. Keisha Brooks noticed the door during her junior year at a small university in Central Texas. She'd lived in Morrison Hall for 2 years by then, knew every corner of the building, every quirk of its 1970s construction. The cinder block walls painted an institutional beige, the tile floors that showed every scuff mark, the window air conditioning units that wheezed and rattled and sometimes died in the middle of August heat waves. She knew the third floor layout by heart, walked it every day. Counted the doors without thinking about it. 14 rooms, 14 doors, 2 bathrooms at either end. A utility closet near the stairwell, normal, consistent, unchanging. Until the night she counted 15. She was walking back from a late study session, tired and distracted when she noticed it. A door between rooms 312 and 314. A door that shouldn't have been there. That had never been there. That occupied a space where solid walls should be. Keisha stopped, stared. Told herself she was more tired than she'd realized, that she was imagining things, that exhaustion could do strange things to perception. But the door remained. Wood paneling, slightly darker than the others. A brass doorknob with a keyhole that looked older than anything else in the building. A transom window above, clouded with dust, too opaque to see through. She reached for the handle, found it locked. Jiggled it a few times, confirming that it was real, that it existed, that her hand was touching actual metal connected to an actual door that led to an actual room. The next morning, she asked her Ra about it. "That door between 312 and 314, she said. "What's it for?" The Ra looked at her blankly. "There's no door between 312 and 314. "Yes, there is. I saw it last night. I touched it. Keisha, I've been Ra here for 3 years. There's no door there. There never has been." Keisha walked the Ra to the spot, pointed at the wall where the door had been, and found. A wall, solid cinder block, painted beige, completely unremarkable. No door frame, no transom window. Nothing but the same institutional blankness that characterized every other wall in Morrison Hall. "I saw it," Keisha insisted. "It was right here." The Ra smiled the patient smile of someone humoring a stressed student. "Maybe you dreamed it. Finals week does weird things to everyone." Keisha didn't dream it. She knew she hadn't dreamed it. But she also couldn't prove it existed, so she let the matter drop. For a while. Then she started noticing the door again. Not every night, not even every week. But occasionally walking the hallway at certain hours, always late, always after midnight, she would catch it in her peripheral vision. A door that existed and then didn't. A threshold that appeared when she wasn't looking directly at it and vanished when she tried to focus. She started researching the building's history, pulled architectural records from the university library, tracked down old photographs in the alumni archives, searched for any mention of Morrison Hall that might explain a door that couldn't decide whether or not to exist. She found the photograph in a 1974 alumni newsletter, a group of students posing in the third-floor hallway. Behind them, clearly visible, was a door between what would later be numbered 312 and 314. The door was open in the photograph. Beyond it, Keisha could see a small room, a single window, a bed, the sparse furnishings of student housing. She showed the photograph to the building manager, a man named Gerald who had worked at the university for over 30 years. "Ah," he said. His voice went quiet, careful. "You found that, did you? What is it? What happened to that room?" Gerald was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There was an incident back in '76, before my time, before a lot of people's time. A student, a young man, had some kind of breakdown, stopped going to class, stopped eating, stopped leaving his room. His Ra tried to intervene. Other students tried to help, but he'd barricaded the door from the inside, built a wall of furniture against it, wouldn't let anyone in." Gerald paused, his hands were trembling slightly. "They thought he'd eventually come out on his own. They left food by the door. Tried talking to him through it, but he never responded. Never opened the door, just stayed in there alone for weeks when they finally broke through. He'd been dead for a long time, starvation, dehydration, self-imposed, like he'd rather die than come out of that room." "And the door?" "They sealed it, not just locked, sealed, built a wall over the door frame, removed it from the floor plans, pretended the room had never existed. The university didn't want the publicity. Didn't want students knowing they were living next to a place where someone had starved themselves to death." Keisha felt cold despite the Texas heat. "Why can I see it sometimes? Why does it appear?" Gerald shook his head. "I don't know. But you're not the first person to ask about it. Every few years someone sees it. Someone notices what shouldn't be there. And I tell them what I'm telling you, don't try to open it, don't try to find it. Whatever's behind that door, it should stay sealed." Keisha tried to take Gerald's advice, tried to ignore the door when it appeared, tried to walk past without looking, without acknowledging, without giving it any reason to notice her. But she couldn't stop hearing the scratching. It started about a month after her conversation with Gerald. A soft sound, like fingernails on wood, coming from the wall between 312 and 314. It only happened at night, only when the hallway was quiet and most students were asleep. Only when Keisha was alone, walking past the spot where the door appeared and disappeared, trying not to think about the young man who had died behind it. The scratching was rhythmic, insistent, like someone trying to get out or trying to be heard. Or trying to remind the world that they were still there, still waiting, still sealed behind a wall that everyone pretended didn't exist. Keisha graduated the following spring. She moved away, started a career, tried to forget about Morrison Hall and its impossible door. She mostly succeeded. But she kept in touch with a few friends from the university, kept hearing news about the campus. And 5 years after her graduation, she heard about the renovation. Morrison Hall was being gutted, modernized, brought up to current safety codes after decades of deferred maintenance. Contractors had been hired. Walls had been torn down, and in the space between what used to be 312 and 314, they had found something the university had spent 50 years pretending didn't exist. The room was still there, small and dark, and exactly as the 1974 photograph had shown it. The window had been bricked over from the outside at some point, leaving the space in permanent darkness. The bed was still there, its mattress rotted to springs and dust. The furniture used to barricade the door was still piled against it, undisturbed for half a century. And in the corner, curled on the floor as if seeking warmth that would never come, were bones. But not one skeleton. 2. The young man who had barricaded himself inside in 1976 had not been alone. Someone else had been in the room with him, had been sealed inside when the university built their wall, had died there in the dark, in a space no one knew existed, waiting for rescue that never came. The investigation revealed the second skeleton belonged to a female student who had been reported missing in the fall of 1976. Her case had never been solved. Everyone had assumed she'd run away, dropped out, disappeared into the world the way troubled young people sometimes did. No one had thought to look behind the wall. No one had imagined she might be trapped in a room that the university had decided should no longer exist. The current theory is that she had gone to check on the young man during his breakdown, that she had somehow gotten inside before he sealed the door. That they had died together, for reasons no one will ever fully understand, in a room that the university had erased from every floor plan and every record. The scratching Keisha heard makes more sense now. The door appearing and disappearing, the way it sometimes seemed to be reaching for attention, trying to be seen, that makes sense too. Someone was behind that wall. Someone had been trying to be found for 50 years. They just needed someone to notice the door that shouldn't have been there. To ask the questions that no one else had asked. To remember that sometimes, when we seal away the things we don't want to see, we seal away more than we realize. Morrison Hall has been demolished now. The university built a new dormitory on the site, modern and safe and completely unremarkable. There are no doors that shouldn't exist, no walls hiding 50-year-old secrets, no scratching sounds in the night. But Keisha still thinks about it sometimes. Still wonders about the young woman who went to help someone in crisis and never came back. Still imagines what it must have been like to be trapped in the dark, waiting for rescue, hearing workers build a wall that would hide you forever. She lights a candle every year on the anniversary of the discovery. She says the names of both students out loud, so someone will remember them so they won't be forgotten again. And sometimes, late at night, she thinks she can still hear scratching. Faint and far away, like something trying to claw through wood and plaster and time itself. Like something that still hasn't found its way out. These three stories share something that every college student understands intuitively. Dormitories are not truly ours. We pass through them for a few semesters, arrange our furniture, hang our posters, and pretend these spaces belong to us. But they don't. They belong to people before us and will belong to people after us. They hold the weight of everyone who has ever lived within their walls. The late-night studying, the tears, the laughter, the moments of crisis that no one else ever knew about. The tunnel intruder reminds us that safety is sometimes an illusion. That the walls we trust to protect us might contain passages we've never imagined. That someone might be watching from spaces we didn't know existed. The sleepwalking roommate reminds us that the dead are not always silent. That suffering can echo through decades, reaching toward anyone who might finally listen. That sometimes the only way to end a haunting is to acknowledge what happened and give the ghosts what they actually need, to be remembered. The sealed room reminds us that institutions sometimes choose forgetting over truth. That the things we hide behind walls don't disappear, they wait. They scratch. They reach toward anyone who might notice that something isn't right. When you leave your dormitory for the last time, when you pack your boxes and return your key and walk away from the building that housed you through some of the most important years of your life, you leave something behind. A trace, an echo, the ghost of who you were in that particular place at that particular time. And somewhere in those walls, all the ghosts accumulate, all the traces overlap, all the echoes continue long after the living have moved on. The next time you walk down a dormitory hallway late at night, count the doors. Make sure the number matches what should be there. And if you see something that shouldn't exist, a door, a figure, a shadow that moves wrong, don't ignore it. Don't convince yourself you're imagining things. Ask questions. Investigate, remember, because some ghosts don't want to hurt us, they just want to be found.